I am Glaucia Rosas, co-founder and director at the EduTech Alliance. In this series of interviews, I am talking with key figures on the international EduTech scene to get their perspectives on how schools can really get themselves on track with their education technology. Hi everyone. Today we have Ben Shore with us. Ben is a senior content designer in the Microsoft 365 cybersecurity team and a bit of a guru on the subject. So, hi Ben.
Hi Glaucia, how are you?
Good. Well, many of the schools that we talk to are using our Microsoft 365 as their core platform for communication and collaboration, and they absolutely love it. I recently recorded an interview with Mike Tolson, and he highlighted the power of Teams, SharePoint, Class Notebooks offering. So these features are well known to most of the schools, but the wealth of cybersecurity features that your old 365 platform has to offer are not so well understood. So today we have a perfect opportunity to explore this area and get people to understand what the sophisticated tool that they have, and they might not know it. So what security service does Microsoft offers to schools out of the box, and what schools need to be doing to take advantage of them?
So there's a whole bunch of different security tools in 365 by default. Some of them, like conditional access, for example. Conditional access lets you restrict access to your Microsoft 365 resources based on different criteria mostly around devices and users. So for example, you could restrict access to certain kinds of devices. So maybe you don't want to allow anybody who's running Windows XP to connect to your Microsoft 365, or anybody running Windows Vista or older versions of Mac OS, for example. You could restrict those so they can't access anymore. Things like that. And that can be great if you know for a fact that your audience, your constituency, has devices that are up to a certain standard. And really they should. I know that's not always practical in education, especially limited budgets, plus you have a whole constituency of students to account for who may be on devices that aren't what we would consider corporate standard, but that's the device they have and that's what they have to use. But there are ways you can still work with it. Likewise with different users, so you can set up groups. So you can have a group that's for your faculty, a group that's for admins, a group that's students, and you can restrict access to different parts of your Microsoft 365 based on those things. The last thing you might consider, especially in an EDU environment, for most people, your users are probably fairly geographically centralized. They're probably in and around the area of your school. Now, I know there are some exceptions to that, but for the most part, if you're running a high school in Toronto, Canada, chances are pretty good that your students and your faculty are all in and around the Toronto area. And conditional access can let you restrict access by geographic region also. So you can say nobody from, Thailand can access my Microsoft 365. That's just helpful because you could sort of put that geofence around. Now, of course, the bad guys can get around geofencing sometimes because of VPNs and things, but it's still a nice measure to add. Yes. In addition to conditional access, we have Exchange Online Protection, which has anti-spoofing, anti-phishing, anti-malware, a lot of those tools in it. One of the best ones for schools is a tool we have called SafeLinks that you really should have turned on. I think we'll talk a little bit more about that in this conversation. No. And also Safe Attachments, which is sort of a relative to SafeLinks. SafeLinks, I should probably elaborate. SafeLinks, what it does is when one of your users gets a hyperlink, either in an email or Teams or somewhere like that, and they click on that hyperlink to go off to the site that link leads to, what SafeLinks will do is SafeLinks will check the link first against and warn that user if it's a known malware or phishing site. So it helps to protect you from those kinds of attacks by that reputational check on the links. And Safe Attachments is very similar, where it does a check on any attachments they get to try to ensure that the attachment is safe before they can open it. We also have Microsoft Defender, which is more on the workstation side, so antivirus, anti-spyware, and so forth running locally. That can be really important. And that's a really good reason also to try to keep at least the machines you control up to Windows 10 or newer, because Microsoft Defender is such a good antivirus platform there. And I guess the last thing I would mention probably is Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Now, especially now, because everybody got kind of scattered to their dining room tables because of the pandemic, it made it a lot harder to control your devices and to manage those devices. And I think Microsoft Endpoint Manager really can help you get that visibility into the individual devices. A lot depends on whether you own the devices, though, or whether it's a bring your own kind of thing. If you've issued devices to your faculty or your students, those are a lot easier to manage and control, as opposed to if somebody's using their own PC, then it gets more challenging. So I think those are probably the ones I would highlight. There's more, but those are the big ones.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm gonna go back to that phishing item that you mentioned. So some cybersecurity experts that we've talked to say that people are an organization's main vulnerability. So clicking on the wrong email link or opening an infected attachment can really cause a disaster. So I know that Microsoft offers training features in its 365 platform. Can you tell us a bit more about them and which plans the schools need to be on to gain access to those trainings?
Sure. And actually, if I could expand just a little bit and talk about training generally too, one of the most important things you can do because you're absolutely right, the people in your organization and in your school can be either your biggest weakness or your biggest strength. And it really comes down to those people making good decisions in the moment, right? That's what it comes down to, because they're the ones who are going to see that phishing message. They're the ones who are going to see that suspicious link or be tempted by that app that might be dangerous. And so we want them to make good decisions. And that's really what the training comes down to, is trying to help them make good cybersecurity decisions. And one of the most important things you can do is create a good security culture, a good positive security culture. And that's got to be baked into all of your training, is creating that good culture. And when I say a good security culture, what I mean is that your people, your students, your faculty, parents too, maybe, feel safe to report security things if they see them, or if they're concerned that they think they've seen a phishing email, or they're afraid that they may have accidentally clicked on a piece of malware and gotten infected. We don't want them to be afraid to report that and to come to you for help. So that's the first thing, is create that culture where they feel safe to do that they're not going to be penalized or shamed for it. And then the second part of it is that they know how to do that. So make sure that your faculty, your students, your admins and parents too, maybe know how to report a security incident to you, a cybersecurity incident. So those are two really important parts of that. And then when it comes to the training, there are a number of tools out there. Some of them are in Microsoft 365. There are also third-party tools. And you can also create your own. I mean, you have to understand, in the EDU space, you have a unique advantage, and that is that you have a collection of passionate and talented educators who love to teach people.
That is true.
So there might be some value in you reaching out to your teachers and saying, what do you think? Do you have any ideas for how we could teach good cybersecurity habits and help people make good cybersecurity? What are your thoughts on what we could do here? Could we maybe create a game around it? A cybersecurity scavenger hunt. I don't know. Your teachers are the ones who do this and are passionate about it, and they probably have some great ideas about how to teach it. So don't overlook that opportunity. I'd also say, when it comes to cybersecurity training, that often is better than longer. A lot of times we'll see the situations where they say, okay, it's time for the annual security training. You're going to spend 4 hours in a conference room or the auditorium or a Zoom call or something, listening to somebody drone on for hours and hours about cybersecurity. People tend to tune that out. They kind of dread it. It's just a chore they have to tick the box on. It's usually better to break it up into little bite-sized chunks. I've seen companies and schools that have had a lot of success with doing every week at our weekly meeting, we're going to do 60 seconds on cybersecurity, just every week, right? Here's our tip for the week. Here's our cybersecurity minute for the week. And make it fun, make it interesting, and have it bite-sized like that. People tend to retain it better and enjoy it more. So when it comes to the tools that are in Microsoft 365, we have a thing called Attack Simulation Training. I believe it's part of the Microsoft 365 A5 plan. Okay. Now I should distinguish, there's a Microsoft 365 A5 plan and an Office 365 A5 plan, and they're slightly different. And I'm not a licensing expert, I should probably say that up front. It's in the Microsoft 365 A5 plan. I'm not so sure that it's in the Office 365 A5 plan. So whichever one of those you have, that makes a difference. But if you have Office 365 Defender Plan 2, that's a special security add-on, then you would also have it. So you could have a different A plan, but you might also have the Office 365 Defender Plan 2. Ultimately, my best suggestion to you is go into your admin console and see if you see it in there. It'll be under, it's in the Microsoft 365 Defender portal. So when you go into your admin console, look for the Defender portal under email and collaboration, and then you'll see attack simulation training if you have it. You could also get to it if you go to security.microsoft.com/attack simulator. So try going to that URL, and that should hopefully, if you've got it, you'll see it there. And it lets you create simulated phishing attacks, for example, or simulated malware attacks where somebody receives a malicious attachment. Now, I do want to say, and you can craft your own attacks, I do want to say be careful with phishing simulations. We've seen some kind of bad, it goes back to that positive security culture, right? We've seen things where they send out a phishing simulation that says, hey, everybody's going to get a bonus. Click this link to get your bonus, right? And they think, oh, that's a brilliant phishing simulator, right? And then people click the link, and then it's like, this was a phishing simulation, you failed, yeah. And then people are like, okay, and so no bonus either. Like, then they just get mad, right? So now they're feeling shamed and mad. So be careful when you create phishing simulations. Don't set people up for disappointment. And I realize an EDU budget is a big deal and a problem often. I've actually recommended to some organizations that what might be a more effective way to do it is to actually send an email that says, periodically that says, hey, everybody, we're going to give you a, whatever it is, a $50 bonus, an extra vacation day, a free sweatshirt with the school logo on it. Whatever they're going to give them, right? Hey, everybody, we're going to give you one of these. It's just going to show up. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do to get this is read this next sentence. And the sentence is, we will never, ever ask you to click a link or download an attachment to collect a bonus or reward, ever. Just and do it that way. And then actually give them the sweatshirt or the $50 or whatever. So anyway, just things like that might be more effective. But just be careful with phishing simulations, because if you tease people and then disappoint them, they don't take that very well.
True, it makes sense, and it's like those out-of-the-box ideas that might stick, because cybersecurity is not a theme that many people understand. Obviously, otherwise you wouldn't need training. But the more creative you can be, the better might be the results.
Yeah, and the repetition helps too. That's the other thing about the bite size. Doing it once a year, 3 months later they've forgotten it, right? But 3 weeks later they've probably forgotten it. Right. But if you do it in the little bite-sized bits, if you do that little, once a month, you're going to send out hey, guess what? This month, we're going to send you a little water bottle with the school logo on it. And by the way, we will never make you click a link or open an attachment, to get these things, right? If you repeat that frequently, then it kind of gets ingrained. And then when they get that real phishing message that says, hey, guess what? Bonus, click this link. They'll go, they never make us click a link or open an attachment to get our things. So anyway. That can help. Just that repetition helps.
Good. As long as they're training somehow and frequently, obviously if you can be more creative and engaging, the better. But at least make sure you're training your staff and they are on top of this, because this is definitely very important for whole school.
And consider training, be different training, and also it depends a lot on the age group. I mean, if you're in elementary school or kindergarten, that's very different from a high school or university, of course. But also consider, can you do some training to your students? Can you extend that to their families maybe, or encourage the students to share with their families? The more you can get that out there, the better.
Exactly. So on another issue now, so cyber protection articles are constantly using phrases such as zero trust and safe access surface edge as future strategies for cyber protections for organizations. Could you explain those terms to me and to the audience who are not really familiar with cyber words like that, like zero trust, safe access? Sometimes safe access surface edge is SASE, right? That's how they call it. So we really don't understand that. Can you help us with that?
Probably not. No, I'm just kidding. They are actually pretty complicated, and a lot of them are buzzwords that tend to mean different things to different people. At Microsoft, we're very big on zero trust, and I will share what my definition of zero trust is. That hopefully will be helpful. But understand that different places, especially if they're trying to sell you something, may use a slightly different definitions. So what zero trust is about verifying explicitly when somebody tries to access something. So it means not assuming that somebody is entitled to access your resources based on where they are. So let me back up just a little bit. So in the old days, right, we had our perimeter, right? Everything happened inside our building, inside our campus, right? We had our physical perimeter. And there tended to be an assumption that if a device or a user was inside that perimeter, that they were trusted, right? They're one of us, they're inside the walls. These days, you can't really do that anymore, especially since now the walls extend out to everybody's dining room tables. But we've learned that approach just doesn't work in the modern security landscape. Okay, now we have to kind of assume that people with ill intent are inside the walls too, and so we sort of assume breach, I guess, is the way to think of it. And so instead of just saying, "Oh, well, you're connecting from the conference room down the hall, you must be trusted," yeah, we're not doing that anymore. Yeah. Okay. What zero trust does is it means to always authenticate and authorize based on all the available data points. So, and this can also be not just location, but also like username and password. Like somebody signs in with a username and password. Okay, does that mean they're automatically trusted? Under zero trust, the answer to that is not necessarily. No. They also would take into consideration the device they're on. Is this a device they've never signed into before? If it's a device they've never signed into before, then that raises a level of, aha, let's do a little more authentication before we confirm this user and grant them access. If they're connecting from a geographic location that they've never connected from before, and I don't mean like the house next door or the Starbucks down the street, but if they're in a completely different country from where they usually connect, okay, let's do a little bit more authentication before we just let you in. Just because you have the username and password, that shouldn't mean you're in. So zero trust is about authenticating and verifying more explicitly and more often, and not just assuming that just because they're physically inside your network, or they are using a username and password, for example, that they should be trusted for everything. Okay. So I hope that helps. And then also the other element of that is we limit access by app also. So we're basically looking at more things before we grant access to things. So by when I say limit access by app, what I mean by that is you might say that, let's say you're a Microsoft shop, and if you are, thank you, that maybe you allow, you have a folder full of documents, and you say, okay, Microsoft Word is allowed to access these documents. This other app over here is not allowed to access these documents. So that's another way that you can implement zero trust, is again also on the verifying on the app basis. Okay. So hopefully that helps a little bit with zero trust.
No, it definitely did. It's a different way of looking at security. I mean, it's not as simple as it was before. I mean, it wasn't simple before, but now it's so many other factors to consider that you understand you can trust any user until you're not 100%, but you're mostly sure that they are the users they are. And, right. And this safe access surface edge is really this protection in the zero trust, correct?
It's a secure access surface edge, SASE as we call it. SASE is even a little bit more kind of squishy and complicated. SASE includes zero trust. So the idea behind SASE is that what you're protecting has kind of gotten more distributed, right? In the old days, you may have had a room with some servers in it, and that's where everything lived, right? So you just had to protect. Everybody was coming to that. Everybody's connections were coming to that room to access those resources. Mm-hmm. That's not necessarily the case anymore, because now a lot of your systems are out in the cloud, right? It could be Microsoft 365. It could be a testing application. It could be some other kind of application that you're using in your school, either with your faculty or your students. And those are scattered out in the world somewhere. They don't live in a room, next door to the principal's office, right? So those protecting those is a lot more difficult. And the other problem is that protecting those has traditionally meant things like VPNs. And even with students, you may have a difficult time implementing VPNs because of their devices. But it's become a little bit more difficult to protect. And a lot of the protection solutions that you have introduce a lot of performance issues. Mm-hmm. So basically what SASE tries to do is SASE tries to take those security and network resources and move them into the cloud and move them closer to the endpoints, if that makes sense. And so the users connect sort of through your SASE solution to Microsoft 365, to Salesforce, to whatever your other cloud resources are. And so SASE can include VPN, it can include firewall, it can include some DNS services. There's a lot of those security services that are all bundled into that SASE solution. But it's in the cloud as opposed to living on your campus specifically. And it's located closer, logically closer to the person who's accessing it. It's a little complicated and hard to rate. Believe me, I'm not even sure I have my head all the way around it.
No, I think it's I understood it. I'm sure the audience understood it, and if they want to explore this in depth, they can send us questions or just look online, ask their partners or their IT to explain this better to them as well.
Yeah, and also I'll add that your networking vendor, whether it's Cisco or somebody else, I'm blanking out on the other company I was just thinking of, but Cisco or whoever your networking vendor is, they probably have their own SASE implementation, and they're more than happy to tell you about it. And so I would reach out to your networking vendor also if you want more details around SASE that could work for you.
Definitely. And so knowing all of that, what are your key tips for that schools should be doing right now to de-risk their positions?
Yeah, we've got about 2 hours. Is that right? No, kidding. Okay, so the number one most important thing is turn on multi-factor authentication. And I know that may be hard for students, but that's okay because hopefully you're limiting what your students can access anyway. So the students are maybe not as high risk a population as your faculty and staff. Absolutely, you should have MFA on for any of your IT admins, multi-factor authentication. But in my opinion, it should be on for all employees, all faculty, all staff. And ideally, you're using MFA that runs as an app on the phone. There are a number of apps you can use for it. Microsoft Authenticator app is free, but there are also other companies that have Authenticator apps. The Authenticator app is better than the SMS, where you get the text message with the one-time code. The SMS is better than nothing. So if that's all you can do, if the SMS is all you can do, then fine, do the text message way. But ideally do it with the Authenticator app. That prevents about well over 90% of the credential attacks that we see. And the other thing is a lot of people don't do it because they're afraid it's going to be a hassle, right? They don't want to have to drag their smartphone out every time they want to sign in. But the fact is that you really don't have to very often. I'm in Microsoft 365 all day, every day. This is where I work, right? I almost never get asked for my second factor because I'm always signing in on the same devices. So the first time you sign in on an unknown device, it'll prompt you for that multi-factor. Again, that comes back to that conditional access, right? Where it's recognizing that, oh, wait, this is not your usual device for this user. Maybe we should do a little more investigation. But if it is your usual device, then you don't even get asked for that second factor because it just goes, okay, you've got the username and password or the PIN or whatever your sign-in is. Okay, and this is your usual device, so you're good. So usually, unless it's been a long time since you've signed in or you've changed your password, if you're signing in on the device you always sign in on, it probably won't ask you for your second factor. But keep in mind that if a bad guy is trying to break in, they're probably not signing in on your device, right? They're sitting probably even in another country somewhere at their own device. So when they try to sign in with your username and password that they've stolen from somewhere or guessed, it will ask for that second factor and they don't have it. So multi-factor authentication, probably number one, two, and three most important things you can do. Second, dedicated admin accounts. So in Microsoft 365, of course, you have admin accounts, global admin or Exchange admin, right? You can set those roles for what they're allowed to configure, right? Make those dedicated accounts as opposed to somebody's regular account. So for example, if Alice is your systems administrator, right? And she signs in at alice@yourschool.edu, right? Alice@yourschool.edu can absolutely be her user account, but it should not be the admin account that she uses to manage Office 365. The reality is we don't do that much managing of Office 365. You're not adding and deleting accounts every hour, probably, right? You're not doing all that configuration. Yeah, hopefully not. That configuration tends to be an hour a week, a couple hours a week. It depends on how busy your shop is, but that would be the example of sign out of Alice, and sign into the dedicated admin account to do that. And that way, if Alice's account does get compromised, they're not getting an admin account. They're just getting the Alice account, okay? Or the Bob account or the Charlie account or whatever. So have a dedicated admin accounts. Don't let people use their regular accounts to do admin. Active Directory hygiene. I see this one all the time. Active Directory is that directory in Microsoft 365 that has all the users, right? Alice, Bob, Carlos, Evan, all those people, right, are listed in your Active Directory. I often see organizations where you look at their Active Directory and it's full of accounts for people that left. They aren't even here anymore, right? They left 2 years ago, but they still have an active account in the Active Directory, which means that person could sign back in, right? Even though they're no longer in your organization. Or if somebody else steals their account info, that person could try and sign in, right? So pay attention to your hygiene of your Active Directory and make sure you're deleting or disabling any accounts for people who are no longer with you. And then I guess probably the last thing I'd say is in Exchange, we have the concept of delivery rules. We kind of touched on this a little bit with the anti-spoofing and anti-phishing earlier. Right? Exchange has a lot of that security stuff in it. And a lot of security threats these days do come by email, whether it's phishing or malware attachments, things like that. And there are some delivery rules you can set in Exchange that improve your security. And I'm going to leave it to you. I'll tell you what they are and let you Google how to do it because I can't explain it in the 60 minutes left or whatever. But the first one is block automatic forwarding to outside recipients. And so basically what that does is it means that if Bob gets an email, right, his account, you can configure automatic forwarding in Outlook and Exchange to automatically forward that email out, right? But you should do is on the Exchange side, block it so that it can't go outside your school. So if Bob wants to forward that email to Carol inside your school, that's okay, right? If for some reason he needs to automatically forward to Carol, fine. But he should not be able to forward to an address outside the school. And the reason is that a lot of attackers, when they compromise an email account, they will silently set up an automatic forward so that even after they're not there anymore, all those emails are still getting forwarded out, right? So they will a lot of times try to target somebody in the accounting or finance department or somebody like that. And now they're seeing all of that traffic and they can use that for attacks. So block those automatic forwards out of the network. And then the second thing that you can do is you can set up an Exchange rule that warns or blocks on file types. So for example, if an email comes in and it's got an attachment on it, and that attachment is a macro-enabled Office file, Excel, Word, PowerPoint, whatever, right? Those are very popular with bad guys these days. They send an Excel file that's got a macro in it. The macro has a virus, malware in it. And when the person receives it, they open the Excel file. It says, oh, do you want to enable content? The person thinks, okay, sure, enable content. When they do that, now they're in trouble. So what you can do is you can set a rule that says if a macro enabled file comes in, you can put a disclaimer up with your own words that says something like, don't click enable content unless you're absolutely sure you know what this does. It can be very dangerous. You know, you can write whatever you like in the disclaimer. But you can create that rule in Exchange. And then the second one is you can actually block additional file types like VBS files and JS files and CMD files, all these different file types that are potentially sources of ransomware. Okay. And so you can say, don't even allow this attachment through if it's got one of these file types. So that would be the next thing I would suggest is Exchange delivery rules, and go look up some of the delivery rules you can configure. Super easy to do. It's built into Exchange. If you've got Exchange, you've got this capability. And it can really improve your resilience against phishing and malware.
Definitely. I mean, that's exactly what the big reason why we wanted to interview you is because, I mean, there are so many tools in Microsoft 365 that people don't know of. Obviously, the IT director, the IT crew, they will know because they are there. But it's hard even for them to make sure the leaders of the school, the education side of the school, like the academic side, they understand what they are about and the importance of understanding what those rules are for, and the impact that it has on the organization in case something happens. So right. Fabulous. I think this is amazing. My last question is, can you elaborate on Microsoft's view on how organizations, especially schools obviously, will be able to protect themselves from cyber attacks in the future?
Sure. So my opinion on that is that probably the two big pillars in the future that will help improve your security pretty dramatically. The first one is zero trust, which we sort of talked about there. And I forgot to mention, we have an alias. It's a website, aka.ms/zero-trust, and the word zero is written out, zero. So aka.ms/zero-trust. And that's a site we have set up that's got all kinds of information on how to set up zero trust for yourself and what zero trust is about. So I'd encourage you to check that out. So zero trust is a big one. And zero trust includes the concept of least privilege, which I neglected to mention earlier. So, and what least privilege is kind of keeping people in their swim lanes is how I like to think of it, right? So, so for example, maybe you have a faculty member who needs access, maybe they teach history, okay? They need access to all of the history files, all of the students who are studying in history, all of the resources you have that are related to the history department are really important to what that person does, okay? And they should have access to that, okay? With zero trust, of course. But that history teacher probably doesn't need access to, I don't know, budget documents for the school as a whole. It maybe doesn't need access to health and medical information about the students. So least privilege means giving people access to the files they do need when they need them, but not access to the files they don't need, and especially when they don't need them. So that's all kind of rolled into the zero trust concept is making sure that you're paying attention to what people have access to. I have been in organizations where they didn't invest any time in thinking about what people need access to, and they just sort of gave everyone access to everything. And that's bad, partially from a insider problem, you know, because you could have somebody who either accidentally or maliciously decides to access files they shouldn't be accessing, and they've been given permission, right? And they're, you know, they are inside your network legitimately because they work there or they're a student or whatever their role is, but they've been given access to far more than they should, and now they're wandering around in places they shouldn't be. So that's one side of it. But the second part of that is if that person gets either compromised, you know, somebody guesses their password, username and password, they get malware, something like that, then that attacker or that malware now operates in your network as that person. And if that person has access to everything, then the attacker has access to everything, or the malware has access to everything. So that's another reason why least privilege is so important, because, you know, if something bad happens, hopefully it's contained to just the section where that person was. So that's the first thing, zero trust. And the second thing that we're really, that I think is going to be big in the future is passwordless. The only people who really like passwords are attackers. I mean, I don't like trying to remember passwords, right? Most people don't like trying to remember passwords. You know, every now and then you get a chuckle out of dreaming up some amazing convoluted password, but for the most part, passwords are a hassle. They're hard to remember. When you forget one, then you have to go through the whole forgot my password thing, right? Now, password managers, which I do recommend, make that a lot easier. And also things like the Microsoft Edge browser and other browsers also can remember your passwords for you and can also suggest strong and unique passwords. But still, passwords are a pain. And so there are a lot of things we can do with passwordless. And we're doing, and that could be biometrics, whether it's a facial scan, fingerprint, things like that. It could be things like multi-factor authentication kind of factors into passwordless, where you're using a device or a token, a hardware key. You've probably seen the YubiKey, which is one brand of the hardware authentication tokens. So I think we're trying to move towards a world where you don't need a password, right? Where it's a combination of your fingerprint and a key, something you have on your keychain that you plug into a USB port. Maybe that's what signs you in. Things like that. So getting away from passwords, I think, is going to be big in the future. Anything you can do to advance that is very helpful. I guess I would say the sort of 2.5, or the third thing maybe would be managed devices. So increasingly not just having people connect with any laptop they happen to pull out of the closet, but actually having the device be more managed, like we talked about Microsoft Endpoint Manager earlier. And so having managed devices. And if you can't have managed devices, because I realize that some of your, especially students, but even some of your faculty may be bringing devices that are their devices and not the school's devices. So it may be challenging to manage them. Using a virtual desktop. So you've virtual desktop being where you connect in with either a virtual desktop app, or increasingly just in the browser. And what they're seeing is a desktop environment that is in the cloud somewhere. And so you see that right now with Chromebooks. You see that with our Windows 365 offering that we just launched. That's that kind of concept of the local device is really just a portal to get to that managed virtual desktop that can be a lot more secure. So that's probably the third thing.
That's fantastic. I mean, those are so much great information here. So all I have to say is thank you so much for all your knowledge, the best practices that you're suggesting for schools. We do expect that they listen and they implement most of them to be able to be to be safe and to protect themselves from disasters that we know there are happening, especially in education over the past year, increasing a lot. So Ben, thank you so much. That was very, very good for us. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.